Story 1. The Whispering Trees. The forest was supposed to be a peaceful escape from the chaos of city life. Emily had always found solace in nature, so when she heard about the secluded trails of whispering pines, she couldn't resist. The name seemed charming at first. She packed her bag and set off, excited for a weekend of tranquility. The trailhead welcomed her with a canopy of dense trees, their leaves rustling softly in the breeze. As she ventured deeper, the forest seemed to close in around her, the path narrowing with each step. The air grew cooler, the light dimmer. She walked for hours, absorbing the serenity, until she heard it for the first time. A faint whisper. She paused, straining her ears. It was gone. Shrugging it off as the wind, she continued. But the whispering persisted, growing louder and more insistent. It wasn't the wind. It was voices. Hundreds of them, murmuring incoherently, rising and falling like a haunting chorus. Emily's heart began to race. She turned in circles, trying to pinpoint the source, but the whispers seemed to come from all directions. Panic set in as the whispers grew louder, clearer. They were saying her name. Emily. She stumbled backward, her breath quickening. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice trembling. Silence. Then the whispers resumed, more insistent. "Emily, come to us." She broke into a run, the path blurring as tears filled her eyes. But no matter how fast she ran, the voices followed, echoing through the trees. She tripped on a root and fell hard, the impact jarring her senses. As she lay on the forest floor, the whispers surrounded her, their words clearer now. "We know your fears, Emily." Memories flooded her mind, her darkest secrets, her deepest regrets. The forest knew everything. Struggling to her feet, she spotted an old cabin through the trees. Desperate for safety, she sprinted toward it, the whispers growing louder with each step. The door creaked open, and she stumbled inside, slamming it shut behind her. Silence. For a moment, she thought she was safe. Then, she heard it again. The whispers, inside the cabin. She turned slowly, her eyes widening in horror. The walls were covered in carvings, faces, twisted and anguished, etched into the wood. They moved, their eyes following her, mouths opening to whisper. "Join us, Emily." She backed away, her hands shaking, and bumped into something solid. She turned to see a mirror, its surface reflecting her terrified face. But the reflection wasn't hers. It was a woman, eyes wide with fear, mouth forming a silent scream. The whispers grew deafening, drowning out her thoughts. The faces in the walls writhed, their whispers a cacophony of torment. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. And then she realized the truth. The forest didn't just know her fears. It was feeding on them. The whispers weren't just voices, they were the souls of those who had come before her, trapped forever in the trees. And she was next. Her vision blurred, darkness closing in. The last thing she heard was the whisper of the trees, soft and malevolent. "Welcome home, Emily. Eve." The forest had claimed another. Story 2. The Hollow Ones. Jack had always been an avid hiker, drawn to the quiet solitude of the forest. When he heard about the remote trails of Blackwood Forest, he couldn't resist exploring its depths. The forest was dense, ancient, and untouched by modern life. As he ventured deeper, the air grew thicker, the light dimmer. A strange sense of unease settled over him, but he pushed it aside. He had heard rumors about the forest being haunted, but he didn't believe in such things. The first tree with a face stopped him in his tracks. It was an old oak, its bark twisted into the visage of a man, eyes wide with terror. Jack shuddered, stepping closer to examine it. The face was eerily lifelike, down to the minute details of the lips and eyes. It felt as if the tree was watching him. He shook off the feeling and continued on, but the faces became more frequent. Each tree seemed to bear a new expression of agony or fear, their eyes following his every move. The forest was unnervingly silent, no birds, no rustling leaves, only the sound of his own footsteps. His unease grew with each step. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. As night began to fall, he knew he needed to find a place to camp. He found a small clearing surrounded by trees with contorted faces. The sight made him uneasy, but he had no other option. He set up his tent quickly, trying to ignore the feeling of being observed. Darkness settled in, and the forest became even more oppressive. The faces seemed to shift in the flickering light of his campfire. Whispers began to echo through the trees, low and indistinct at first, then growing louder. Jack's heart pounded in his chest. He strained to hear the words, but they were just out of reach, a cacophony of despair and torment. His hands trembled as he reached for his flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the faces around him. They seemed to move, their mouths opening and closing as if trying to speak. Panic gripped him. He wanted to run, but his legs felt like lead. He backed away, stumbling, and tripped over a root. The flashlight flew from his hand, its beam casting wild shadows. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. Jack scrambled to his feet, desperate to escape. But the faces seemed to close in on him, their eyes glinting in the darkness. He ran blindly, the forest a blur around him. The whispers followed, a relentless, maddening chorus. He stumbled into a clearing and froze. In the center stood an enormous tree, its bark scarred with countless faces. At its base lay a collection of bones, scattered and half buried. Jack's blood ran cold. He realized with dawning horror that these were the remains of those who had come before him. The whispers rose to a crescendo, and he turned to see the faces in the trees watching him, their expressions twisted with malice. He understood now. The forest wasn't haunted by spirits. It was consuming them, trapping their souls in the trees. He felt the roots beneath him begin to shift, curling around his ankles. The ground seemed to pull him down, the whispers filling his mind. His vision blurred, and the last thing he saw was the gnarled face of the ancient tree, its mouth open in a silent scream. The forest had claimed another victim. The trees whispered once more, a new voice joining their chorus. Jack's voice. Forever trapped, forever hollow. Story 3. The Endless Path. Brian, Lisa, and Mark had been friends since childhood. They often sought adventure in places far from the beaten path. When they heard about a hidden trail in the heart of Blackwood Forest, they eagerly planned their hike. The trail was unmarked, known only to a few locals who spoke of it in hushed tones. As they entered the forest, the air was crisp, the sun filtering through the dense canopy. They followed a narrow path, laughing and chatting, the forest alive with the sounds of birds and rustling leaves. Hours passed, and the trail seemed to stretch endlessly. Brian checked his map, frowning. We should have reached the clearing by now. Lisa shrugged. Maybe we took a wrong turn. But there were no forks in the path. They pressed on, but the unease grew. The forest felt different now, oppressive, as if it were closing in on them. The birds had gone silent. The only sound was their footsteps on the leaf-strewn ground. Mark glanced around nervously. Are you guys feeling weird about this place? Lisa nodded, her face pale. Yeah, it's like I don't know, we're being watched. Brian forced a laugh. Let's keep moving. We'll find the way out. But the forest seemed to stretch on forever. The path twisted and turned, leading them in circles. Panic set in as the hours dragged by, the light fading into an eerie twilight. They stopped to rest, their breaths ragged. Lisa looked at Brian, fear in her eyes. We've been here before. Look, that tree with the strange markings. Brian's heart sank. She was right. The tree's bark was scarred with deep, unnatural symbols. Mark cursed under his breath. We're lost. As night fell, they decided to set up camp, hoping to find their bearings in the morning. They built a fire, but its warmth did little to dispel the growing fear. The darkness around them was thick, almost tangible. Lisa stared into the flames, her voice barely a whisper. Do you hear that? They listened, straining their ears. There, just beyond the firelight, was a faint, rhythmic sound. Footsteps. Brian stood, gripping his flashlight. Who's there? No answer. He shone the beam into the trees, but the light was swallowed by the darkness. The footsteps stopped. A chill ran down his spine. They huddled close to the fire, sleep eluding them as the forest seemed to watch, waiting. At dawn, they packed up quickly, eager to leave. But the path had changed. It twisted in ways they didn't remember, leading them deeper into the forest. The symbols on the trees became more frequent, more elaborate. Mark's voice was hoarse with fear. We have to get out of here. They ran, panic driving them, but the forest was relentless. The path looped back on itself, a cruel maze with no exit. Exhausted and terrified, they stopped in a small clearing. Brian fell to his knees, despair washing over him. We're never getting out, are we? Lisa's eyes were wide with realization. It's the forest. It's playing with us. Mark's face twisted in anger and fear. Why? Why us? A low, whispering wind answered, carrying voices that seemed to come from the very trees. Because you came. The symbols on the trees glowed faintly, pulsing with a malevolent energy. Brian's mind raced, a horrifying thought dawning. It's feeding on our fear. As if in response, the whispers grew louder, the forest closing in. The ground seemed to shift beneath them, roots and vines creeping closer. They tried to run, but the path twisted, trapping them in an endless loop. Brian fell again, the whispers filling his head, drowning his thoughts. The last thing he saw was the symbols flaring brightly, the trees closing in. The forest had claimed its prey. The path stood empty once more, waiting for its next victims. The whispers continued, a symphony of despair, echoing through the endless forest. Forever.v